Hi everyone, tonight we're diving into one of the pirates' biggest struggles, staying hydrated. We're talking about pirates on high seas, where finding a decent drink of water was more like a deadly treasure hunt than a simple matter of opening a bottle. I know, we all think pirates are all about the swords and treasure, but their biggest challenge by far was securing fresh drinking water. It's so important that, if you think about it, water was more valuable than gold to pirates. Now, I know you're probably thinking, but pirates lived off rum and treasure. Sure, those were nice.
That's
But
vile.
when you are miles out at sea with no land in sight,
We're almost out.
fresh water is your lifeline. For a crew of 50 pirates, the daily water requirement was roughly 50 gallons
I know.
just to keep everyone alive and functioning in the Caribbean heat. Imagine that. They didn't have convenient, modern-day plastic bottles or filtered water.
We've got just
No,
enough to make
they
it
had
through,
wooden
if we're
barrels,
careful.
the go-to solution. And while barrels worked in theory, they didn't exactly keep the water fresh for long. Wood is porous, meaning moisture and bacteria could easily get in. So what started as clean, fresh water quickly became something that could give you a serious case of food poisoning. It wasn't just about having enough. Pirates also had to keep their water safe to drink, which was a constant battle. Let's take a moment to really think about this. You're on a pirate ship in a blazing sun. The only liquid gold you have left is probably a nasty mix of stale water that smells like a damp wooden cover. Sounds pleasant, right? Not so much. That's when pirates started getting desperate. Water became their most precious commodity. And as the water barrels dwindled, so did their patience. In this environment,
Are you all right there, matey?
pirates had no choice
should get
but
him
to
some water.
constantly monitor their water supply, ration it, and sometimes fight off the temptation to take too much. If the water wasn't enough of a problem, there were other dangers lurking on the way. Let's talk about the desperation that led pirates to drink seawater. I mean, you're parched, the sun's burning down, and you're thinking, hey, water's water, right?
What
Wrong.
in the
All right, let's
blimey
talk about one of the
is
biggest
this?
mistakes pirates could make
No.
when they were in desperate need of water, drinking seawater. It sounds like something that might make sense in the moment when you're literally
Drinking
surrounded
seawater,
by the
it's a
stuff
slow
and
death.
feel like you're dying
Madness
of
and
thirst,
thirst will
but
claim
it's
you, making
actually
you
one
see
of
things
the
that aren't
worst
there.
things you could
You'll be
possibly
begging
do.
for a
So
clean
here's
drop.
the thing. Seawater has a high salt content, much more than your kidneys can handle. On average, seawater has about 3.5% salt. It's like throwing a teaspoon of salt into every glass of water. For comparison, our kidneys can
Our
only
water is
process
gone.
about
What do we do
1%
now?
of that. When you drink seawater, your body gets tricked into
need
thinking
a
it has
plan.
enough
There's
water.
nothing left.
But what it's actually doing is working overtime to get rid of that excess salt. And guess what? It's using even more water than you've just ingested. You end up in a vicious cycle of dehydration. And pretty soon, your body is begging for relief, and you're just making things worse. Now, if you're a pirate, this is where things get really bad. Drinking seawater leads to vomiting, cramps, diarrhea, and all sorts
They
of
always
nasty
head for the
symptoms.
fresh water.
I mean, pirates weren't exactly known for their hygiene, but this was
You
a
see
whole
these
other
markings
level.
here?
The human body just
Fresh
can't
water, for
handle the
sure.
saline
Yes,
overload.
yes, let
And
us
when it
pray
doesn't work
they
out,
lead us to
it doesn't
land.
work out fast. Seawater poisoning or hyponatremia, if you want to get technical, can be fatal if you don't stop drinking it soon enough. There are actually stories about pirates who thought they could mix seawater with wine to make it more palatable, as if the alcohol would somehow cut down on the negative effects of salt water.
we have
Let's
found
be
it!
honest. If you're already desperate enough to drink seawater, mixing it with wine probably isn't going to save you. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. In fact, some pirate crews became severely ill from this. As if being out at sea for months wasn't hard enough, now you're literally poisoning yourself. Can you imagine the crew full of pirates vomiting their guts out on the deck while trying to keep their ship afloat? Not the most glamorous life.
ahoy!
By now, you might be thinking, how did they not learn sooner? And to be fair, they didn't have modern science to
They're
warn
heading
them.
straight for it.
Pirates were survivalists, and at the
Yes,
time, it
that's
wasn't
what the
like
map
they could
says.
just Google, don't drink seawater. They had to figure things out the hard way. Many died trying to quench their thirst with salt water.
Keep up. We're
only
almost
to
there.
suffer even worse consequences. The word eventually spread among sailors, seawater is a death sentence. It wasn't until the most desperate of pirates realized that drinking seawater wasn't
I found
the
this
answer.
spring first.
What's
It's
crazy
mine.
is that this
Whoa!
mistake wasn't just about
This
seawater.
water
It was
belongs
about
to
the
no
human
one.
survival instinct.
We both
In the
need it.
face of extreme thirst,
Water!
the mind
Finally!
plays
But
tricks
look,
on you,
the ship.
and pirates were vulnerable to this. They were stuck in the middle of the ocean, with no land in sight and nothing but waves and salt water below. When the water barrels ran low, the brain got desperate, and the body just couldn't keep up.
We found
Pirates
it!
were literally dying from
There's
thirst
water!
in a sea of water. And so,
Oh, thank
pirates
goodness.
had to get creative. They had to find ways to avoid the deadly trap of seawater. They started
Fresh
relying
water.
on alternative
Aye,
methods
it's
to
true.
secure fresh water. Ways that might seem bizarre today, but
Look,
were life-saving.
fresh
at the
water
time.
ahead.
They learned to ration their water like never before and invented ingenious systems for collecting rainwater.
We need to
None of
move
this was
fast.
easy. These methods
This
were
way,
often
I think.
hit or
I
miss.
think.
Pirates might go days or even weeks without fresh water, always hoping
There's no
for
way
a
we're gonna
miracle
find fresh
rainstorm
water.
to come.
We've
So,
tried everyone on
What
this
did
island.
pirates do when their fresh
I know
water
this time is
barrels
different.
ran out? They became resourceful
Are we there yet?
in every sense of the word. They didn't just sit there and
I knew
hope
he
that
didn't know the
ocean would
way.
somehow provide. They had
Crocodiles,
to
I
keep going,
think.
keep
Stay back.
surviving. Because for a pirate, survival wasn't just about the treasure. It was about keeping alive long enough.
Yeah, sure,
to
this
see
time, lad.
another
This is
adventure,
our last
to
chance for
sail
fresh
through
water.
yet
Yes,
another
Captain,
storm.
I've studied the
As
charts.
pirates
The
sailed
tides
from
will carry
island
us
to
straight
island,
to the spring.
battling
Aye,
rough
the
seas,
spring.
enemy ships, and the sun's relentless heat, there was one constant enemy they could never escape: the struggle to store water. Sure, they could gather water in barrels, but let's face it, barrels were a poor excuse for water storage, especially when you're out at sea with little access to fresh sources. While wooden barrels were the primary method of holding water, they were far from perfect.
Amazing.
Let's break it down. Wooden barrels are porous. The very thing
The
that
silver
made them so
keeps the
useful
water
for holding
fresh.
liquids wood was also a major weakness. Without airtight seals, moisture
By
from
the gods,
outside
the
could get
water is
inside,
clearer.
Yes,
causing
it truly
bacterial
is.
growth. Pirates were well aware that water stored in barrels quickly
What
turned
in the
foul.
blazes is that
Even
horrid
if they
smell?
had fresh
Blast
water
it
to
all!
begin with,
The water's
it
gone
wouldn't stay
foul.
fresh for long. After weeks of being tossed about on a pirate ship, the water inside would start to stink. You've heard the saying, "Smells like rotten wood."
It
right?
feels like it holds the
Yeah,
bigger sediments
imagine
well.
drinking that water. Nothing like a
I think the
refreshing
sand
sip
is doing
of
a decent
foul-tasting
job, too.
sludge to keep you going on a long journey. The worst part, as the days went by,
can't be.
that wooden barrel water turned into a breeding ground for
Is
bacteria
this really
and
all there
algae,
is?
making it even more dangerous. But there was no choice. The pirates didn't have the luxury of bottled water or advanced filtration systems. The water they had was either contaminated or rotting in barrels, and they had to make the best of it. No matter how much they tried to seal the barrels with tar, bacteria still thrived in the humid, hot conditions of the ship. And every time they took a drink from the
Just a
barrel,
little more.
it was a gamble. Was it safe? Or were they just getting another mouthful of
All right, that's
contaminated
it.
water
Perfect.
that could make them sick? So, what did pirates do to cope with this situation? They didn't sit idly by, hoping the water would miraculously stay clean. Pirates had to innovate constantly to preserve what little fresh water they had. Over time, they developed clever techniques to help keep their water supply as fresh as possible, but it was always a game of survival. The first major innovation involved charring the inside of the barrels. By burning the interior surface of the wood, pirates created a
the
charcoal
silver in the
barrier
water
to help
keeps it
slow
sweet.
down the bacterial growth and preserve the water flow. The idea wasn't perfect, of course, but it was the best that was available at the time. The charred wood absorbed some of the impurities and acted as a natural filter, which extended the shelf life of the water. Still, even with this method, the water was far from pristine. It was often still cloudy and tasted bad, but it was drinkable, or at least survivable. In addition to charring the
We're running
barrels,
low on water, my
pirates
friends.
also started using silver coins to help preserve the water. You might think this sounds like superstition, but it wasn't just for that. Pirates discovered that silver has natural bacterial properties. By dropping silver coins into the water barrels, they found that the water stayed fresher for longer. At the time, they didn't know the science behind it, but they knew the results were effective. They might not have fully understood why, but they learned that silver helped keep the water cleaner for longer, reducing the growth of harmful
The plants are
bacteria.
wetter here.
It was one of those accidental discoveries.
And the birds fly
but
this
it
way.
worked. But even silver couldn't protect the water forever. Eventually, even the silver coins and charred barrels
Those birds are
wouldn't
heading
stop
inland.
the water from going down. Over time, the pirates realized that they would need to filter the water before drinking it to avoid getting sick. So the pirates came up with another solution:
Water!
cloth filtration. They would stretch pieces of cloth over a container and pour the water through it to remove larger particles like bits of floating
Look,
algae,
water.
dirt, and debris. It wasn't the perfect method, but it helped to clean the water and make it a little more drinkable. Of course, the water still didn't taste good. It often tasted like wood, sea salt, or even tobacco, but it was better than nothing. Sometimes, in their desperation, pirates were more creative with their water filtration techniques.
Fresh water.
One method they tried was to filter water through tobacco leaves.
Land
They
ho,
believed
mates!
tobacco could purify water, and while the results were questionable at best, they gave it a shot. Of course,
Those gulls
water
fly
tasted
true,
like a
right to
disgusting
fresh
mix
water.
of tobacco
Aye,
and seawater,
it's a good sign.
but at least it didn't kill them properly. At the end of the day, pirates had to rely on trial and error to find ways to survive. They didn't have the luxury of modern technology, and their methods were often imperfect. But what they had was ingenuity and a relentless drive to survive. Every trick, no matter how strange, was an attempt to preserve the most important resource they had: water. So, next time you take a sip from your water bottle, remember that pirates faced far worse conditions, drinking water that tasted like wood and fish guts, hoping it wouldn't make them sick. Their resourcefulness wasn't just about stealing treasure or fighting battles, it was about surviving each day on the vast, unpredictable ocean. And that survival came down to the most basic element: water. Imagine being a pirate, stranded at sea, your water barrels empty, and the salty sea all around you. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, for pirates, freshwater springs were literally life-saving. But finding fresh water wasn't as easy as spotting land on the horizon. Pirates had to search for signs, navigate by instinct, and sometimes even rely on luck to find the life-sustaining liquid. One of the smartest things pirates did was create water maps, secret charts that marked the locations of freshwater springs and sources on islands. These weren't your average treasure maps. No, these were the real treasures, hidden away from rival pirates and often passed down from crew to crew, carefully guarded. While everyone else was after gold and jewels, pirates knew that fresh water was the ultimate prize. They didn't just hoard treasure, they hoarded water sources, and the maps that led to them were worth more than a chest full of coins. Pirates learned to read the signs of nature. Plants, birds, and even the landscape itself could point them toward freshwater. Certain plants, like ferns and thick grasses, only grew where water was abundant. They had learned that these plants were reliable indicators of underground springs. It wasn't just about sailing to the nearest island and hoping for the best. Pirates knew the patterns of nature and understood how to interpret them. And then there were the birds. Now, you might think that pirates were more likely to rely on their swords than their birdwatching skills. But let me tell you, birds were some of their best guys. They knew that certain species, like seagulls or cormorants, would always fly towards fresh water sources during specific times of the day. If pirates saw flocks of birds flying in a certain direction, they'd know to follow them. It's a little like following the GPS of the sea, except instead of a satellite, they had feathers. But even with all this knowledge, finding water wasn't always straightforward. Pirates weren't the only ones looking for freshwater springs. They knew that land was often scarce when you are sailing the wide oceans, and other ships, including enemy pirates, would also be searching for these lifelines. So, getting to a freshwater spring before anyone else was crucial. Speed and secrecy were key. If pirates found an island with fresh water, they had to act fast. Sometimes other ships were only a few days behind. Once on land, pirates would sometimes have to get their hands dirty, literally. They would dig seepage wells to collect fresh water. These weren't anything fancy, just simple holes dug about 50 feet inland from the shore. The sand and earth naturally filtered the water, keeping out the salt and making it drinkable. Pirates knew how to work with nature, harnessing its power to give them a chance at survival. These seepage wells were a game changer when fresh surface water was nowhere to be found. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Pirates didn't just survive, they adapted. They took what nature gave them and made it work. And that's what made them such skilled survivors. Not all pirates had the luxury of finding fresh water easily. And even when they did, it was still a constant battle to preserve it. That's where their resourcefulness and adaptability came into play. Sometimes, pirates would even fight over water sources, which could get pretty intense. Imagine a ship of pirates with no fresh water, arriving at an island, only to find another crew already there, drinking from the same spring. That's not a situation you'd want to be in. It's hard to look tough and fearsome when you're fighting over water like it's the last drink you'll ever have. But pirates knew that finding these springs wasn't just about survival for the crew, it was about life or death. Running low on water could kill a pirate crew faster than running into a Royal Navy ship. In some ways, finding fresh water could even be more important than treasure. Sure, gold and jewels were the ultimate goal, but if you didn't have fresh water to drink, you might as well have nothing. Pirates knew that a freshwater source wasn't just a resource. It was their ticket to survival. It was more valuable than any chest full of riches, and they fought for it like it was their last breath. At the end of the day, pirates had to get creative, to use everything in their arsenal to survive. They learned to read the environment, to use their knowledge of nature and the sea to their advantage. They were master survivalists, constantly finding new ways to adapt and innovate in the face of challenges. Water, in the end, wasn't just a necessity. It was their most precious treasure, one they fought for, hoarded, and sometimes risked everything to keep. Now, let's get into one of the pirates' most ingenious methods for staying hydrated on the open sea rainwater collection. When the rainstorm rolled in, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a godsend. It was like winning the hydration lottery, except the storm had to come at the right time, and you had to be ready for it. Trust me, pirates didn't let a single drop of rain go to waste. When the clouds rolled in and the heavens opened, it was all hands on deck. The pirates transformed their ship into a giant water collecting machine. I mean, they didn't just sit there and hope for the best. They were strategic. Every inch of the ship, from the sails to the railings, was used to funnel water into storage barrels. The sails, which were usually there to catch the wind, were repositioned to act as funnels, guiding the rainwater straight into containers. Gutters, which were initially intended to keep seawater from washing onto the deck, now became part of the water highways, directing precious rainwater into waiting barrels. Here's where things got a little tricky. You'd think rainwater would be clean, right? But no, the first few minutes of rain were usually contaminated. The water that fell initially was a mixture of sea spray, saltwater residue, and bird droppings. As you can imagine, that wasn't the best for drinking. So the pirates had to wait it out for a bit. They would let the ship have its bath, as they called it, letting the first part of the storm wash away the gunk before collecting the good stuff. The pirates had it down to a science. As soon as the rain started, they would scramble to adjust the sails and position themselves just right to maximize the amount of water they could collect. It wasn't just about getting a little bit of water. They wanted to capture as much as they could before the storm passed. It was like pirate water gathering Olympics. But they weren't just competing for gold medals, they were competing for their lives. But as with all things pirate life, rainwater collection had its downsides. It wasn't always reliable. Sometimes weeks would go by without a single drop of rain. When you're surrounded by endless ocean, the weather can be as unpredictable as a pirate's mood. In some regions, the sky could stay clear for months, and you were left staring at the horizon, hoping for that one storm to roll in. Even if the storm did come, there was no guarantee that the rain would be clean enough for drinking. Sometimes, pirates had to settle for less, just trying to get something, anything to keep them going. It was all part of the challenge of surviving out there on the open ocean. And yet, pirates were known for being some of the most resourceful people to ever set sail. They figured out a way to make it work, even when things weren't ideal. They didn't have the luxury of predicting the weather with modern tech. They had to rely on their instincts, their knowledge of the sea, and a bit of luck to catch that next storm. And when they did catch one, they didn't waste a second. Every drop of rain was precious, and they knew that even in the middle of the most brutal storms, the rain was their ticket to survival. The collection system pirates developed wasn't just about gathering water, it was about surviving. When fresh water could be a matter of life and death, pirates had to make sure they were always prepared to take full advantage of any chance they got. If it rained, they had to be ready. If it didn't rain, they had to find other ways to make their water last longer. And if they couldn't get enough fresh water from rain, they had to rely on every other resource they had to make it to the next source of water. I bet you didn't think pirates would be so organized when it came to rain. After all, most people picture pirates running around swinging swords and shouting "R" all day. But when it came to something as essential as water, pirates knew that quick thinking and coordination were the keys to survival. No matter how fierce they were in battle, when it came to securing hydration, they knew it was a team effort. Still, despite their best efforts, rainwater collection was never foolproof. It was just one piece of the puzzle. Pirates had to keep constantly innovating, adapting to new challenges, and finding ways to stretch their supplies. After all, as much as they hoped for a storm, the sea didn't always provide. But that didn't stop them. They adapted to whatever the sea threw at them and kept sailing. When the clouds refused to show up and rainwater was more a myth than a reality, pirates had to think on their feet. They couldn't just sit around hoping for a storm. They had to actively seek out fresh water. And that meant getting their hands dirty. And when they couldn't rely on barrels of rainwater or fresh springs from islands, they turned to the land itself to supply the most essential thing for survival: water. One of the first and most successful methods pirates relied on when they were desperate for fresh water was the seepage well. If you think it sounds simple, you're right, but it was genius given the resources they had available. Pirates would dig a hole about 50 feet inland from the shore, where the water would naturally filter through the sand, leaving the salty seawater behind. The pirates knew that sand and earth acted as a natural filter, and fresh water could be collected from beneath the surface, completely separating the salt. This method allowed them to tap into fresh water, even when there was no clear surface spring to be found. Sure, it wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a lifesaver. They could dig a well, wait for the sand to do its magic, and draw fresh water from it. They didn't need fancy equipment or complicated tools, just a shovel, some patience, and a little bit of luck. And that luck, of course, would play a big role, because not every island had water hidden under the sand. Some spots were dry, barren places that only promised more misery. But when they found fresh water, it could keep a crew alive for days or even weeks. And that's why water maps were so crucial. These maps weren't just about treasure. They marked seepage wells and other water sources, keeping the crew one step ahead of the game. Now, don't get too comfortable, because finding fresh water wasn't always as easy as just digging in the sand. Pirates had a lot more tricks up their sleeves. For instance, they learned to watch for plants and birds that led them to fresh water. Pirates were nothing if not observant, and they understood that nature could provide clues to fresh water. Certain plants, like ferns and thick grasses, thrived in moist environments, an obvious sign that water was nearby. These pirates weren't just searching for land, they were reading the land itself, like a secret code, and these plants helped point the way. But it wasn't just plants, they had birds to help too. And I'm not talking about the typical pirate parrot. No, these pirates were after seabirds, particularly those that were known to fly inland when they needed to drink. If you saw a group of gulls or other coastal birds flying in a certain direction, it was like a flashing neon sign saying, "Fresh water this way." And so, the pirates would follow the birds. Sometimes it was trial and error, but more often than not, these flying guides led them straight to freshwater springs. And let's be real here, pirates weren't above some good old-fashioned sleuthing, even if it meant chasing after birds. If there was one thing pirates were good at, it was figuring out how to stay alive long enough to find the next treasure. They were resourceful to the core, and when their freshwater supplies ran low, they didn't let pride stop them from taking advantage of every tool available. Speaking of tools, when they reached land, pirates also had another clever trick up their sleeves: hiring local guides. You might think the pirates were always about stealing and plundering, but they knew that locals who knew the area were often invaluable when it came to finding fresh water sources. Unfortunately, not all guides were trustworthy. One pirate captain once wrote about being led in circles for 3 days by a local guy who had no idea where the water sources were. And there was that other time when a guide led the pirates to a spring that was home to a colony of crocodiles. Safe to say that didn't work out. It didn't stop pirates from using guides though. Sometimes they just had to find the right ones. One of the most creative methods pirates employed involved something I like to call the bird trick. This isn't about following birds to water sources, no. This was about using birds as time clocks. Pirates knew that birds, especially seabirds, needed to drink water at certain times of the day, usually early morning or late afternoon. By observing their behavior, pirates could predict when and where they'd find fresh water. A group of birds flying at a particular time meant they were heading to a water source, and all pirates had to do was follow. It's almost like pirates were nature's detectives, cracking the code of the sea to secure that most precious resource. So it wasn't just about digging holes or following birds. Pirates had to use every trick in the book to find fresh water. They hunted for clues in the environment, adjusted their course when necessary, and relied on their survival instincts. And even though fresh water was often in short supply, pirates never stopped trying. They made use of everything they had to ensure that they survived long enough to keep searching for treasure. And that's what made them such legendary survivors, not just their ability to steal, but their determination to survive the harshest conditions the sea could throw at them. Now that pirates had collected their precious fresh water, they still faced another battle keeping it fresh. It's one thing to find water, but it's another to ensure it doesn't turn to green, stinky sludge before you can drink it. And let's face it, pirates didn't have fancy filtration systems or modern technology to help them out. They had to get creative with their storage methods. And believe me, they didn't just settle for any old barrel. They had to make sure that their precious resource didn't spoil after a few days at sea. The standard way pirates stored water was in wooden barrels, big, sturdy barrels that could hold a lot of liquid. But wooden barrels weren't exactly ideal. Sure, they were durable, but they had a major flaw. Wood is porous. That means it absorbs moisture. And when you're storing water in something that absorbs moisture, you run the risk of spoiling the water. The problem wasn't just the wood itself. The environment on a pirate ship, humidity, heat, and constant movement created the perfect conditions for bacteria and fungi to thrive. So by the time the pirates went to drink from their barrels, they were often drinking water that was more alive than they were with all kinds of bacteria and organisms swimming around. And I'm sure you can guess, that didn't exactly taste refreshing. But pirates didn't just give up and accept that their water was going to spoil. No, they got creative. They realized that to make their water last longer, they had to come up with ways to slow down the process of spoilage. Their first innovation was to char the inside of the barrels. I know, it sounds like something out of a pirate's DIY survival kit, but it worked. By burning the inside of the barrels, they created a layer of charcoal that acted as a natural filter. This helped absorb some of the impurities in the water and slow down the growth of bacteria. It wasn't the perfect solution, let's be real. It's not like they had the technology to purify water properly, but it worked better than nothing. The charred wood also acted like a protective barrier, keeping the water somewhat fresh for a little longer. But even with the charred barrels, pirates still had to deal with the inevitable water going bad. So they started using silver coins to help preserve it. You may think, wait, isn't silver something pirates would just hoard for treasure? Well, yes and no. Pirates weren't just after treasure, they also knew that silver had antibacterial properties. At the time, they didn't fully understand why silver worked, but they knew that putting silver coins in the barrels helped keep the water fresher for longer. It was a bit of a happy accident. They didn't realize that silver could kill bacteria, but they discovered that the coins helped reduce contamination in the water. A bit of luck, combined with some trial and error, and pirates had stumbled upon a key survival trick. But even with charring and silver, pirates were still dealing with water that was less than ideal. So they resorted to filtering the water before drinking it. Pirates would use cloths to filter out the bigger particles like algae, bits of wood, and whatever else might have ended up in the barrel. It wasn't a perfect filtration system, but it was better than swallowing an entire mouthful of floating garbage. Sometimes, though, pirates had to get even more creative with their filtration. If they were feeling particularly desperate, some pirates would filter water through tobacco leaves. You read that right, tobacco leaves. I can only imagine how awful that must have tasted. But desperate times call for desperate measures. It didn't purify the water in any meaningful way, but it might have made it a little less gross to drink. The taste? Well, probably disgusting. Imagine seawater mixed with tobacco and a dash of unhygienic pirate sweat. Not exactly the refreshing beverage you'd hope for, but that's the thing about pirates, they were survivors. They didn't have access to modern water filters or purification systems, but they made do with whatever they could get their hands on. Their resourcefulness is what allowed them to make it through the toughest conditions. Sure, they drank water that smelled like rotting wood and tasted like tobacco leaves, but it kept them alive, and that was the key. They didn't let the harsh realities of pirate life stop them. They adapted to the challenges, sometimes with creative solutions, sometimes with desperation, but always with the knowledge that water was the key to survival. And as much as pirates were known for their ruthless nature and treasure hunting, they also understood that without water, they couldn't get very far. Their battles weren't just against other pirates or the Royal Navy. They were constantly fighting against nature itself, the sea, the sun, and the thirst. The pirates' quest for treasure may have been legendary, but it was their quest for water that truly kept them sailing across the high seas. Now, what if I told you pirates didn't just rely on rainwater, fresh springs, or charred barrels to keep them hydrated? Oh no, they had a secret weapon, grog. And I'm not talking about just some boozy drink to get them in the mood for a fight. This concoction was a lifeline during their long voyages at sea, a brilliant solution to a very real problem. Pirates, in their infinite resourcefulness, knew that water could go bad fast, but with a little rum and a dash of lime, they could make their water last longer and survive some of the toughest conditions at sea. So, let's take a deep dive into what grog was all about and why pirates swore by it. Grog wasn't just some random drink they made for fun. It was a mixture of rum and water, and believe me, it was a critical survival tool. The alcohol in rum helped to kill harmful bacteria in the water, making it safer to drink. And considering the foul conditions pirates had to deal with, especially with their barrels of water turning into breeding grounds for bacteria, this was a game changer. Drinking grog wasn't just about getting a buzz. It was about making sure everyone stayed alive long enough to continue their pirate escapade. Without grog, pirates might have succumbed to waterborne diseases, or worse, dehydration. But grog was more than just a bacterial cleanser. Pirates knew that scurvy, that awful disease caused by lack of vitamin C, was a constant threat. They were stuck out at sea for months, with very little fresh produce to help them get their daily dose of vitamin C. Scurvy would make even the toughest pirate weak, disoriented, and, in the worst cases, it could lead to death. But pirates found a clever way to combat scurvy by adding lime juice to their grog. Limes were packed with vitamin C, and adding them to their rum water mix helped pirates stay healthy while on their long voyages. It wasn't just about hydration, it was about preventing scurvy and keeping the crew in fighting shape. Now, let's talk about how this liquid miracle affected the pirates' daily life. Grog time was almost as sacred as battle time. The crew's daily ration of grog wasn't just for fun, it became part of their daily routine. Pirates didn't just sip on water throughout the day, they had a strict schedule when it came to their grog intake. This routine helped manage their water consumption and kept the crew from drinking too much of their precious, limited supply of fresh water. In fact, the rationing of grog was so crucial that pirates used it to keep order and discipline among the crew. And if you think pirates didn't mind a bit of drunken chaos, think again. They knew how to manage their supplies and their drinking habits. Some pirate captains were known for being strict about grog rations, ensuring that each crew member got their fair share and that no one was left without. One particularly clever pirate captain even designed a system where each pirate got their daily ration of grog, making sure that they couldn't drink all the water at once and go overboard. Grog made sure that pirates couldn't guzzle all their fresh water in one go, extending the supply. But while grog had its perks, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Pirates didn't always get it perfect, and there were times when their grog concoctions went awry. Some pirates complained that too much rum made the water taste worse. And let's not forget, the alcohol content, though helpful for killing bacteria, could make some pirates drunker than others. Not the best state to be in when you're trying to stay alert and ready to fight. And don't get me started on the fights over grog rations. There are records of pirates literally fighting over who got extra grog because they were feeling extra thirsty that day. Even among hardened pirates, grog could become the source of tension. But let's be real for a second. Despite all its quirks, grog was vital. Pirates didn't have the luxury of modern water filters or bottled water. Their survival depended on resourceful solutions, and grog was a brilliant one. It kept them hydrated, prevented diseases like scurvy, and helped maintain the discipline of the crew. And while grog wasn't a miracle cure, it kept them going long enough to fight their next battle, sail to their next destination, and keep plundering the high seas. There was something almost ritualistic about grog time. It wasn't just about quenching thirst, it was about maintaining a pirate's sense of order and camaraderie. It gave pirates something to look forward to during their otherwise grueling days at sea. When the rum was mixed with water and the lime was squeezed in, it wasn't just a drink, it was a reminder that they were surviving together. It was about the small moments of connection in the middle of the chaos. In the end, grog was more than just a drink. It was part of the pirate spirit. It was a way of life, a tool of survival, and sometimes a reminder of just how resourceful pirates could be when faced with the most brutal challenges the sea could throw at them. So, the next time you sip on your favorite cocktail, just remember it's pirates' ingenuity that made your drink possible.